Look, shoddy, this a Drake type beat. Aubrey Graham, Graham Cracker. Look, my name is Aubrey Graham, but I'm not a cracker. That's something you would say. Let me show you how it is though. Look, my swag is astronomical. I'm fly like aeronautical. I'ma surmount all my obstacles. I'ma pull up in that drop top bopsicle. She gonna lick me like a popsicle. Look, okay. Going after the money, it's easy peasy. I'm feeling sleazy. I come in looking greasy. I go to your sister's house, she making me mac and cheesy. Her knees be on the ground where she touch me and tease me and please me. There was a gap in our relationship, now I got a bridger like Phoebe. I'm out in Kyoto. The world moves in slow-mo. I got love for my brothers, no homo. Golly. Woo! Alright, I don't know what to say for the intro. Something about something. You know, I'm a guy, whatever. I came across an article that is awfully relevant to the themes I discuss on this channel. So let me go ahead and just not mince words and get straight into it, huh? Heart breaks. Man, my heart ache. I was in a dark place. Got some sweet in my cup, but it ain't no sorbet. Sorry, bae. That's just gas. That's just ass. All right. This is by The Hill in July of this year. A record share of Americans is living alone. This article is pretty interesting. I'm not going to read it in its entirety for this video, so I'm probably going to do some editing. Nearly 30% of American households comprise a single person, which is a record high. Scholars say living alone is not a trend so much as a transformation. Across much of the world, large numbers of people are living alone for the first time in recorded history. It's just a stunning social change, said Eric Klinenberg, a sociologist at New York University and author of the book Going Solo. I came to see it as the biggest demographic change in the last century that we failed to recognize and take seriously. So this is completely new. Never before seen, ever. We've been here for what? I don't know, at least like 35 years. Since the world started, and this shit never happened. And here we got the graph since 1940, 8%, and now 2022, 29%. So almost a third. The solo living movement intersects with several other societal trends. Americans are marrying later, if at all. The nation is aging. The national birth rate is falling. More than anything, perhaps, the rise of single-person households is about women entering the workforce and achieving economic self-sufficiency. The share of adult women participating in the labor force reached 50% around 1980. Historically speaking, you don't really see people living alone until women have control of their own lives and their own bodies, Klinenberg said. Does the rising population of solitaires signal a bold new age of independence and self-governance, or the end of human society as we know it? Maybe a little of both, experts say. Living alone can be a dream come true, said Bella DiPaolo, author of the forthcoming book Single at Heart. Solitary living means you get to curate your own life, she said. You decide when you want to go to sleep, when to get up and when to eat, what to watch or to listen to for entertainment, and how warm or cool your place will be. No more fighting over the thermostat. Other researchers see a marked downside to living alone, especially for older Americans, for people who live outside thickly settled cities, and for pretty much anyone who is not alone by choice. Research is unequivocal that people aging alone experience worse physical and mental health outcomes and shorter lifespans. I think it's something we should be worried about, said Wendy Wang, director of research at the Institute for Family Studies, a conservative think tank. If we have fewer and fewer children, that means we have fewer people to work, to be consumers, to pay taxes. Wang notes that low fertility rates are a global problem. Living alone is much more common in large cities. At younger ages, men outnumber women in one-person households. Young men are far more likely than young women to be single, and they tend to marry later. The gender gap in solitary living closes with age. In the retirement years, women are more likely than men to live alone. That statistic is partly about women outliving husbands and partly about gray divorce, the rising rate of marriages that dissolve after age 50. The gray divorce rate has doubled since 1990. It used to be that if people were married for 30 years and they entered their 60s, basically they were going to stay married, said Barbara Risman, a distinguished professor of sociology at the University of Illinois, Chicago. You would pass the risk of divorce. No one has ever passed the risk of divorce anymore. The share of Americans in prime marriage years who are actually married has dwindled from about 2/3 to around half since 1990, Pew data show. Nearly 2/5 of Americans are unpartnered, neither married nor cohabiting. Is that a problem? Researchers consider living alone a risk factor for loneliness and social isolation, conditions associated with a host of physical and mental maladies, from heart disease to obesity to anxiety and depression. That is not to say, however, that someone who lives alone is doomed to loneliness. Men tend to fare less well than women in single-person households. People living alone may struggle in rural areas but thrive in cities. Think of Seinfeld, the sitcom set in Manhattan and populated by characters who mostly lived alone but who seemed to spend nearly every waking hour together. Even if you live alone, Hockley said, you can have a very rich social life. Alright, so there you go. There's the article. Let's talk about it. So all these people are living alone, and it's established that this is because of feminism. Bitches be working, and that's the cause of this. So if you were to argue for feminism or for any of these more individualistic social changes, you couldn't do it on the grounds that these changes aren't causing people to live alone, because that's just not true. You would argue that while these changes are causing people to live alone and other things like it, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. As it says in the article, you would argue it signals a bold new age of independence and self-governance. And, while it may cause people to live alone, this doesn't necessarily mean people are atomized. The cause of that is a complete other thing. Living alone can be a dream come true, she says. You get to curate your own life, when to go to sleep, when to wake up, what to watch. You don't even have to fight over the thermostat with your other housemates, right? And then you go down here and you see the very point that even if you live alone, you can have a very rich social life, right? Just because you live alone doesn't mean you're atomized. It's totally fine. So you can imagine why this article was of interest to me. I frequently talk about atomization and the destruction of community. And, when I see these rising figures of male loneliness, of the incel crisis, I would say I'm kind of like an incel apologist, right? That's my position. I don't really subscribe to any pills or whatever. I think that's kind of cringe and gay. But when I see these rising figures, male singledom, things like this, and I see in the same vein people are living alone, it's hard for me. I don't think I really need a study to correlate these kind of things or connect them, or at least surmise that they are a part of the same larger problem, even if they're not directly correlated. So I wanted to expand on some things, and let's start with this lady, Bella DiPaolo. Now, you might assume, based on what she said, that she's one of these old, coping, cat lady feminist types. And I watched one of her TED Talks. I read an article written by her, and there's some of that. I won't say that's a completely wrong characterization. The general thesis of her work is that people who live alone are not less happy. People who are single are not less happy. There shouldn't be this large societal pressure to get married. Things like this. A lot of what she references in her TED Talk is like self-reported happiness levels, comparing people who are married and people who are not married, people who live alone, things like this. And that didn't really convince me, because we have more objective measures of things like this, like right here. People who live alone, people who are not married or don't have kids, die earlier. They encounter health problems earlier. Having a family, like your own family, increases your lifespan. And I can only infer from that, even given that people will rate their happiness level at a 7 when they're single and at a 7 when they're married with kids, always, right? That, because they live longer, there's, a healthier mental state as well. But that's not all. Miss DePaulo did actually bring up some interesting points that are definitely worth talking about, and that is that so many marriages end up in divorce now, so many relationships end, and that leaves people more depressed, more lost, often more broke afterwards. So due to the generally trepidatious state of relationships, there is a position there. She didn't really frame it this way, but there is a position there where, like, what's the point? Why try? Because being single is definitely better than being in, like, a nightmare relationship that's, just a real bummer for everybody involved. But let's get back to the sort of main point about living alone. She also talks about, she references certain studies, which there are studies that conflict this, but that people living alone aren't really more lonely than people not living alone, and that just because you live alone doesn't necessarily mean that you are lonely. And this is true, but there's some problems with this. The first is that it's contingent on a few things that are going to make it way easier or way harder for you. Number one, whether or not you live in a city. This is said in the article. It makes sense. You're closer to a lot more people, more densely populated, more things going on. If you're just like living alone in a suburb, that sounds pretty nightmarish. Number two, be a woman, whether or not you're a woman. This is also said in the article, and this is because of the differences in the way men and women socialize, and just the differences between men and women in general. Women socialize over, like, socializing itself, and men socialize over a shared goal or a shared activity. The third thing, whether or not you're neurotypical, and who you are in general. I guess I could lump some, like, blackpill points in here. Like, if you're a 5'4" dude, your motivation to go outside probably will be not as high. I think there's a general correlation between being chronically online, being introverted, or having social anxiety, and your looks level. And number four, this isn't mentioned directly in the article, but you can infer it, how old you are. And this is in multiple facets. If you're Generation Z living alone, number one, there's not going to be a lot of other people who are Generation Z living alone. Most of them are going to be in college. There are a lot more millennials, there are a lot more Generation X, there are a lot more boomers, just in general. So you're going to feel more isolated, less likely to connect with someone your age. And also if you're old, like if you're like an old person walking around alone, that's pretty, you see that, that's depressing, right? Your mood gets worse, your body starts failing you, you look uglier, you're sagging, you look decrepit, and you don't have a family who's going to stick there with you and love you despite these things unconditionally. All right, so you have like these 4 or 5 things that will widely determine your success living alone. Where you live, rural or urban, whether or not you're a woman, if you're neurotypical, your temperament, your looks, and your age. There you go. Now, you can have one of these things, or maybe 2 of these things going against you and still prevail. But if you got a few, or if you hit a bingo, you're pretty fucked. So if you're a millennial, sort of extroverted, neurotypical 35-year-old woman living in a big city, yeah, it really shouldn't be a problem for you. But if you're a spurgy type of guy who wasn't socialized well growing up, you like video games, and you're 5'6", and you live in a suburb or a rural area, and you live alone, you see these kind of people a lot. You really do. And it's really like, it's kind of weird and unfair and fucked up to be like, you're just not trying hard enough. And even if you don't meet any of these requirements, you are a woman in a big city or whatever, there's still this like general chaos of fragmented and like mechanical relationships that don't really stick around. Like, you meet people, maybe you become friends, but they don't last because there is no actual cohesive community there. Everyone's moving around, doing all this horse shit. Everyone gets in and out of relationships like, 3 years max. That's how long it'll last. So that's the first problem with Bella DiPaolo's line of reasoning, is all these contingencies. But also with this, it's also just the general problem with this type of thinking, which is based in liberalism. It's very individualistic, placing ultimate responsibility on the individual. Yeah, relationships are falling apart. Yeah, people are living alone. Yeah, community's harder to find, but it's still out there. You just got to go outside. You just got to touch grass. You just got to try harder. And it's like, well, I suppose it's not bad advice, but community should just be there. It really shouldn't be contingent on these type of things. So that's why this advice simply doesn't work. The whole loneliness epidemic will continue to grow and blossom and get worse. It's like, I remember Vosh, when talking about my video, said something about high school being an artificial environment where you're surrounded by other people your age, and when you grow up to be an adult, you go into the real world. That's the real world. The natural world is you're living alone, and you're going out, like, trying to outsource community in different areas. No, it's not. Like, you're talking about the vast majority of human history where we've always had tribes, always had tight-knit villages, communities, everybody knows each other, to now, which is, as it says in the article, this is a completely new thing. So as much as you tell people to try harder and go outside and, you're not doing it right or whatever, we're going against thousands of years of human psychology, how we've lived forever. It's like we're on a sinking boat and you keep on telling people they're not rowing hard enough. The system's clearly not working. No matter how what gaslights you could throw at all these lonely guys. So that brings me to my second problem with this line of reasoning, and that is that it's selfish and unsustainable. When you live alone, when you're single, when you don't have kids, the birth rate lowers. And number one, that eventually leads to societal collapse. But number two, let's just play this out socially. So less and less people are having kids. These kids are growing up in families where they're only children, and they're growing up in neighborhoods where there's less kids. See, when I was a kid, there were friends at school. I had my school friends, but they were neighborhood friends. Go across the street, play football, go to their house, play Mario Kart, do whatever. But now the few younger kids I know don't know any kids in their neighborhood. And I talked about this, last Halloween with my niece. That was just extremely depressing. That's going to fundamentally change how they're socialized growing up. They're not growing up in these extended families, and they don't have good neighborhood friends. Their neighborhood's not like a community at all. It's just their one house and their two parents who are working. And they go through school, they're out in the real world, they get to the point where they have to live alone. So they're going to be out there, there's still going to be barely any other people their age. You see where I'm going here. The declining, the population pyramid, inverting has a lot of social repercussions as well. So even if I were to believe you that you are happier being single, which a lot of the times I doubt, you're dragging the whole shit down with you. You're fucking everything up for your self-indulgence. But no, it's totally fine because you don't have to fight over the thermostat. You get to choose when you get up and when to eat, which by the way, you don't, provided you have a job, right? So instead of being beholden to a family and people you love, you're just beholden to your boss. Come on, lady. You're not independent at all. You're still completely owned just by the machine, by, Mr. Silverberg, your boss. And then your friend Lisa, who got the job faster than you, she's getting promotions surprisingly fast. And if I were a bargaining man, I would say it's because she's jacking off Mr. Silverberg or doing other illicit activity. So, your boss or your company is still objectively deciding when you to go to sleep and when you get up. Unless you're living alone off some massive inheritance or something, which, in that case, fuck you. So, that's that. And as much as I want to end this video like a back to the kitchen, ladies, kind of thing, that's not even, the full problem. Like, there's so many angles at which this is happening. Even if we all embraced traditional values, um, it's like too late. We've reached a point of industrialization. I mean, technology, loss of religion, biologically, what's happening to us because of agents that are in our food and products that we consume daily, messing with our hormones. This specific issue, it's feminism, but broadly, it's more than that. It's not even specifically a social thing. It's like a whole lot of things, but putting these broads, getting them back making sandwiches, I probably wouldn't hurt.